Let's turn, oh, you don't have your Sidurim, but I'm gonna start with the bracha, okay? We're on page 107, if anybody has a Sidur and wants to follow along. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. To busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And may the words of Torah that are in our mouths be sweet, and be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of our children and our children's children and all the people of Israel. And may everybody come to appreciate the depth and the meaning and the consequence of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, who chose us from all the people. V'natan lanu et Torato, and gave us the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Powerful are you, God, who gives the Torah to us and to everybody who is seeking Torah. Wonderful. Amen. So, amen. Shalom.
People that are available for God.
For God.
To choose.
That's true. Probably, I think there were a few good choices, but I think we won out.
Good choices.
Yeah, maybe, or choices. You know what? The truth of the matter is, having choice is a good thing. So it's, but we can talk about that another time.
We were the 70th choice.
70th choice of the 70.
There were 70 nations, right?
So before we get down to the business that I really want to talk about with you, I want to do a preamble to it. And it's only because, you know, if you say it's your favorite line in the Torah, it's probably a line that you shouldn't actually say, because probably you could say that every week, right? This is my favorite line in the Torah. What I'm actually going to suggest is this is my favorite line in the Torah this year. Okay?
This year?
This year.
This week.
Even this year. And I'll tell you why in a moment, but let's get to the line, okay? It's on page 724, the beginning of chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus. Hi. Parashat Emor, which is the parasha for this particular week, right? This is the Parashat HaShavua. Emor el HaKohanim. As you're finding page 724, chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus, I'll just tell you that this parasha has special meaning for me. One of the reasons it has special meaning for me is because one of my sons, Zakai, who's becoming a rabbi, had his bar mitzvah on this particular parasha. And by the way, this wasn't originally going to be his parasha. His parasha was going to be my parasha, which is Bamidbar, which is in a couple of weeks, the beginning of the book of Numbers. Why did it become his parasha? My teacher and my mentor, Rabbi Lipnik of blessed memory, this was his parashat HaShavua. This was his parasha for his bar mitzvah. Not only his first bar mitzvah, but his second bar mitzvah as well at 83. And when my son found out that this was Rabbi Lipnik's parasha, he asked if he could change his date so that he could have the same bar mitzvah as Rabbi Lipnik. And so we agreed, he talked to the senior rabbi, and we agreed that we would change the parasha as long as he read the full parasha and the haftarah and davened and gave a dvar Torah. And we had all kinds of conditions and we agreed. And the only thing was he let Rabbi Lipnik read a little bit of the Torah, which was interesting.
This is the line, right?
And this is the line where he started to read. That's how we got to this, right? But I wanted to say something.
But by moving up the bar mitzvah, was your son old enough to move it up?
Yes, by the way, this whole notion of being 13
I
and
know.
right? You have to be bar mitzvot. You have to be a person who has sort of bar dat. You have to have knowledge, and you have to have, according to the Gemara, simanim. You have to have signs physically that you're mature. Trust me, he had all the signs that he needed to have, and he was a great kid, and he still remains a great kid because he has a good mother, and everything is Baruch Hashem. Okay. Chapter 23. But I want to show you this one line, which I think is by far amongst the most consequential lines in the Torah. I didn't make the same mistake twice, right? And it's really very important. So somebody look at the beginning of chapter 23, okay? And take a look at it, and somebody read it for me in English out loud, or if we want, we could all, while we're chewing, read it together. So how about somebody just read it, please? Just beginning of chapter 23, verse 1.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions. On 6 days."
Perfect, okay? So that is the line number, Aleph and Bet, right? Line 1 and 2, verse 1 and 2, okay? Take a look at these two verses for a moment. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe le'emor. That's pretty normal. We have that right on a pretty regular basis. It's the number one line in the Torah, right? God spoke to Moses saying, right? Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel. Yes, it's true. right? There's a good, say it again, it's redundant.
Redundant.
Right, there's a lot of this appears many times. There's a lot of good rationale for it. We can talk about it another time, but I want to get to the main point of what I want to say here. Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amagta alehem. Now look, Mo'adei Adonai, which means the festivals of God. Mo'ed is another word for Chag, right? Holiday. Mo'adei Adonai, asher tikreu otam, which you will declare them to be, Shalom Aleichem, right? Which you will declare them as happening, right? How does it go on?
May God.
Okay, Moadei Adonai, Asher Tikru Otam Mikra Kodesh, which you will call events which are holy, Elehem Moadai. These are my festivals.
So what I've just got out of that, and I don't know if this is where you're going. Or
Yeah.
not, what is that God said, we're gonna have all these festivals, but man's gonna decide when they are.
Do you see that? Look at the verse again. Who decides when
So
the
that is where you're
festivals occur?
going.
Yeah, of course it's where I was going, right? Who decides when the festivals are? Does God decide when the festivals are?
In relation to each other, yes.
Only Shabbat, okay? Only
Shabbat.
Shabbat, okay, so that's good, thank you, but that's not what the question I asked, but it's a very important insight. So, but let's go to what I'm trying to get to. The point here is that if God declares that there will be festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, right? God declares that these things should exist. In theory, they should exist. In practice, they should exist. Who makes the determination when they actually happen?
Certain bodies of people.
No, don't get general. Who?
Here it says God
We do.
does.
No, it doesn't actually say that.
These are my fixed times, doesn't say. Like,
No, but who determines that they're the fixed times?
right,
The
The
Israelites.
people decide who
People, right.
fixes them. In other words, this is a moment in time where you could either call it a partnership between God and humanity, or humanity and God, whichever way you want to go, but it doesn't happen. Hi, how are you? It doesn't happen without what? Doesn't happen with?
Shut up with the people.
In other words, God can say we want to have festivals. Who's going to establish that the festivals are going to exist and when they're going to exist? Humanity. And so despite the fact that we think that God commands exactly when every festival should be, we come to the appreciation that in part, we are responsible for when the holidays will come. There may be a general principle that God lays out. You should have Pesach, you should have Shavuot, you should have Sukkot, you should have Rosh Hashanah, you should have Yom Kippur. We understand those are really consequential and significant, but who ties the whole thing together? Humanity. And one second, I know we got some questions. I know it's a hard concept to swallow. But the point here is that there is a kind of a duality that exists here. There is a synthesis of the human and the divine that ultimately determine when we celebrate, when we observe. And by the way, I'll expand that to say how we observe. What are the things that we do? And that thrusts an awful lot of power into the hands of humanity and particularly into the hands of
The Israel.
religious leaders. Let's say, just for lack of a better term, right, rabbis. And by the way, that's really consequential. You need to remember that Judaism, despite the fact that we're reading from the Holy Writ, from the 5 books of Moses, which is a great gift from the Almighty, at least that's what some of us believe, right? That what? That in the final analysis, religion is a synthesis of the divine and the human working in concert with one another to try to create a religious civilization that can work. And if I sound a little like Mordechai Kaplan talking about religious civilization, that's a true concept. That if you dig down into Jewish tradition, you will understand that as much as there might be divinely ordained sacred times and occasions, the punctilious nature of the details associated with how that will play itself out are in the hands of every generation to talk about how it's going to be observed. And if you need any additional assistance with that, take a look at what we do these days with every one of the festivals. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, all of those festivals, there's very little in the Torah about how they're supposed to be celebrated. And then you come to Shul, and if you were at Shul during Pesach, Shavuot, or Sukkot, which of course you should be, those are not, hey, Rabbi, how are you?
Hey, good, how are you?
Nice to see you. If you take a look at those experiences, Those are now 3-hour tour, right? Minimally, because what do? We add, right? And what do we add? The easiest one to say is we add musaf, which is an additional service, right? Which recalls the sacrifices that we used to give, right? And then we add megillot, we add special readings, and we add special maftir selections, right? We take out 2 Torahs and sometimes more. We keep on adding and then adding and adding in order to enhance, which tells us what? Ele moadei Adonai. These are the sacred times of the Jewish people. Asher tikri'u otam, which you declare them to be, not just what I declare. Hold on, let me just finish the thought, okay? And then we can talk about it as much.
You first.
Okay, so go ahead, ask the question.
Or they talk about God is giving us specific times. Are you saying that God did not decide when we were celebrating it or how we were
Oh,
celebrating it?
the answer to that is God says something's gonna happen on the 15th of the month. We decide when the month starts.
That's for sure. Do you know how they declare the arrival of a new month?
Yeah,
Witnesses go out and they look at the Levana, then they look at the moon and they declare that, but by the way, what happens if it's cloudy?
that's what we have to do.
Okay, so that's why we end up with 2 days, which tells you that what? Fixed times for almost anything are a fallacy. It's a kind of a notion that somehow or another, it's a propitious moment in time, and God declared that this would be the moment in time. Other than Shabbat, and you're right about Shabbat, okay? Other than Shabbat, almost everything else is fungible in some kind of way. And the truth of the matter is that is actually a great blessing. Why? Because it doesn't come down, right, top down directly to us, other than conceptually. How we ultimately lay it out, play it out, allow for it to flourish within our communities is very much dependent upon us. I want everybody just to think about this for a moment. Think about a custom that you have in this synagogue that did not originate from the Torah or from rabbinic literature. Do you have any very important celebrations that you have within the life of the synagogue? Do you ever honor anybody at any time of the year, during holidays, during special Shabbatot? Right, the whole notion of having brides and grooms of the Torah is a really wonderful concept, right? Shabbat Chatan, Shabbat Bereshit, all these people who are honored. It's a wonderful concept. Where is it geschrieben? Where is it written? Where is it written? Ele moadei Adonai mikra'ei kodesh asher tikri'u otam b'moadam. You declare them. Ele he moadai. Those are going to be those festivals. In other words, we determine in every era what the practice of Judaism is going to look like in that particular era. Now, by the way, that we know that there's filters, right? The rabbis get prime position in making those determinations. But
Rabbi, where's your wife?
she's not here. She just got home late last night. She was all over the world in the last few weeks. So she's sleeping. But the point is that what? If we don't declare them to be the moments in time, then what happens? The moments in time don't happen. And what that does is it thrusts a lot of power and responsibility into the hands of us to determine when they're going to be. I'm making a really strong point in all of this because I want to say some of you are shaking your head in the affirmative because you really get it. The point is, if we don't decide that these things are important, they are going to disappear. If we don't decide that they're consequential and we make a big deal about them by doing, how many people have special recipes for Yontif? How many people have special things? You only put special china for Yontif, special dishes for Yontif. And I mean dishes, both the physical dishes as well, right? And we were going through all our stuff at home as we're planning to move. And I said to my wife, well, maybe we can get rid of this. And she looks at me like, yeah, I had 2 heads. I said, what's going on? She's been ready to get rid of anything, me, everything, right? But she get rid of any, but no, you can't take those dishes. I said, but dishes that you never liked, but they represent Pesach. Right? Because that is what is consequential and significant. And who made that determination? We made that determination. Elehem Moadai. And what's interesting is that God hands over the power to the children of Israel to determine ultimately, in a partnership, what the holiday is going to be. God declares that there's a festival. We declare when and how the festival will take place. Okay, a couple of questions. Go
It's
around.
interesting that this is happening in terms of time, as you said,
Yes.
fixing for time.
Yes.
Previously, the same phenomenon happened for fixing of space by individuals when God said, build the Mishkan.
Right? Build me a
So
Mishkan and
this-
I will
the
dwell within
Mishkan,
you.
it's for space, and for this, it's time.
I think it's very, very consequential what it is that you're saying. There are two axes, right? And those axes intersect with one another, right? Time and space are connected to one another, but in both cases, we are actively involved in the determining of how those things will function.
Right,
Okay,
and this is, happens after the golden calf. Okay,
okay,
before that, it was all about God performing miracles and wonders. But after that, he begins to share with the people.
okay. And let's say something important about that for a moment, okay? The point is that any religious practice that's going to stand the test of time has to be accepted by people. And when it's rejected by people, it'll fall off the map. And here's a great example. How many times have you seen duchenin, the blessing of the priests, right? How many times have you seen it?
The
Once.
synagogue.
Once. How many have you seen it? Have you ever seen it in shul here? Right? And and by the way, it's a good rationale. This is not a negative about the shul. This is a positive about the shul. The conservative movement in this particular synagogue made a determination that we don't do that anymore. Why? Because it created a caste system within the children of Israel. Kohanim, Leviim, Israelim, and that is not what we were talking about. We were very much pushing for egalitarianism, not just in terms of men and women, but egalitarianism in terms of all people. All people have access. Do you remember when you would get the first aliyah? Probably I never got the first aliyah because I wasn't a Kohen. No, I was the son of a Kohen, right? So I never got the first aliyah. I remember the first time somebody invited me for the Levi aliyah. I said, I'm lo Levi ani, lo ben Levi ani, right? I'm not a Levi myself, nor am I the son of a Levi. Why are you giving me the Levite aliyah? And they said, well, we got rid of that a long time ago. Now, I want to say that I understand getting rid of it, and I appreciate that movement made that determination. But what did we lose in the getting rid of it?
So being a Levi or being a.
I don't know the importance, but how about
Connection to
the
past.
a connection to the past? But what about existentially, personally, for the person in that moment? Do Kohanim and Leviim feel any different than the regular Israelite? Well, when does a Kohen have any real honor now? Only at I don't know, at a pigeon a ben, right? You give some coins, but does anybody even know that? Does anybody do it anymore? And here's the problem. By the way, we didn't have a firstborn son, so we didn't have to do it. But the point is, it still happens in some places in the world. But if you don't make something special and important, what happens? It falls off the map. And that's the whole point. Ele Moadei Adonai. These are the holidays which you establish, because if you take hold of it, you will observe it. When you don't take hold of it, it will fall by the wayside and become inconsequential. I could prove it to you 100 different ways. I just showed you one. Okay, we're going in order. Rich, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm really trying to get the macro of what you're teaching.
Yeah.
So really is the justification for conservative Judaism in that we believe that Judaism, as we practice it, needs to be flexible compared to like Orthodoxy and the fact. And then you also said something that, and I've heard this before, that it's not necessarily, some of us believe that it's from God.
Right.
That's always kind of blown me away a little bit. So I'm trying to understand, like,
So two things.
where we all stand here.
All right, two things. What I'm trying to suggest is that maybe this is the best way to put it. And it's probably the easiest for most people to swallow. I don't say it because it's simpler. I think it's what I really feel. Religion is a partnership between the divine and the human and the divine. It's God in search of, to use Heschel's term, man, right? And then there's Buber, man in search of God, right? There is that dual-edged sword.
Read the book.
Yes, right. I read them both. The point here is that it's a consequential reality when you say that, they say in Aramaic, ha beha talia. This is dependent upon that. Religion only really works when it's a combination of a God and a humanity who want to be in partnership with one another, hugging and wrestling it out so that you can come up with a religious tradition that honors both sides, both the divine element as well as the human element, okay? And I think that issue is really important for us. And there are going to be things in particular eras where we're going to say, why am I doing this? And some people will say, because God commanded that we do it. And other people will say, I'm doing this because it's essentially meaningful and important to me, and it changes my life, and it adds color and meaning to my life.
So what's the argument, though? The Orthodox would argue
And
that
it's all from God. I mean, you could say the Orthodox, if you, it's not such a.
it's not fair to say though, I get it,
Right,
but I'm.
but orthodoxy as a
generalizing,
position, yeah.
You know, would say, well, now, you know.
You do it because
we're-
God said you do it.
We're water, but then the way we're practicing it, and I agree, I mean, I get, I'm here because of the philosophy, so I'm with you, but. They would argue, well, what's to prevent Jews watering down our practice and our religion, and look what's happening to you all.
Right. And my point would be in a counter to that is sort of what I've been saying. That it's actually in the Torah. Ele moadei Adonai. These are the holidays. Asher tikru otam moadav. That you, the people of Israel, will declare to be, those will elehem moadai, those will be my festivals. In other words, from the get-go, from the inception, the concept is that we are partners in the creation of a calendar. We are partners in the creation of a way of life. We are partners in the way of serving the Almighty, and that it's one of the great gifts. God actually has a great, God is a real mensch, right? God says something really important. It's like when you say to your kids, I want you to do this, right? What's the best way to get your kid to do something? Do it yourself, yeah. In other words, let your kid watch, and do it, by the way, in a way that your kid sees that it's important to you.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, know what I really learned to daven? I sat next to my father in shul. Now, by the way, I was one of those kids who wanted to sit next to my father in shul, okay? There are lots of kids who don't want to sit. I have some of those too, okay?
Like your father?
But the truth is, my kids always would sit next to my father in shul. He didn't even have to say anything. He'd just look over and they would come sit next to him. Now, that's the power of a Zeta anyway, right? But it's who he is. He draws people in. But if you really want to understand davening, sit next to somebody who's a davener, right? And my dad cannot sing a lick, by the way. It's not his intonation, right? It's his presence, right? And that's one of the things that's really consequential and significant. It's not what he says, it's how he says it. And it's so interesting to me to see that we sort of have, you know what we don't have? We have texts, but we don't have text people. Heschel talks about text people, people who represent the way of life. I want to be like Mike, remember that commercial, right? You want to be like Michael Jordan, right? I want to be like Rabbi Akiva. I want to be like Shimon Bar Yochai. We want to be those people. And if we're going to do that, then we have to be willing to engage in two things. A, to follow the Lord when it's clear what the Lord wants of us, which is not always so clear, but also to insert ourselves in the religious phenomena, to insert ourselves in the religious experience in ways that will be meaningful to us and to our generation. And therefore, I want to say this really with a lot of, Rabbi Al was here, but I want to say it with a lot of humility and with a lot of caution. If the synagogue experience becomes inconsequential to the people who are the people coming to the shul will not last long. The shul will disappear. So what we have to figure out is what is it that people need? And that's why you have committees, right? And that's why you have processes. That's why you have blue ribbon commissions that talk about what the future of Judaism will look like in your locale. All politics and all shul and all worship are local. It's what's right for our kahila, what's right for our community. And you can look around at the two other conservative synagogues which are a stone's throw from this location, and they are slightly nuanced different than you are. And I promise you, within 10 years, it's going to be consequentially different. You know why? Because one of these three synagogues, I believe, will start to do patrilineal as well as matrilineal descent, right? That people will be Jewish by virtue of either father or mother. It's going to happen within the conservative movement. And I would predict Cleveland will be one of the last places to do. That's why I said 10 years and not 5 years, but it's going to happen. Because out of necessity, people are going to say, this is the reality. And if God didn't want it to be that way, someone will say, well, God wouldn't have made it that way.
Isn't this what we call the oral tradition?
Yes, it is, but careful, I want to go around.
mean, the
Rich, I want to
main-
make sure I answered your questions. Okay, okay, yes, sir. Nelson. You've been very patient.
I've heard this story, I suppose, I thought it was true, that if there was a Jewish Robinson Crusoe, lost track of when Shabbat was, then Robinson would just declare someday Shabbat, and every 7 days would observe Shabbat. And when he got back to civilization, would patch it up. So even Shabbat is up to us.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's a nice, I think, addition to this conversation. But you have to be, you sounded very Talmudic there for a moment, right? Which is, if you're in a situation where you're Robinson Crusoe and you lost on an island, you don't know when Shabbos is, right? So you have to, but I think you're 100% right. It's a really, really an important idea. But it's a partnership, because if, for example, right, let's say, Nelson, you were, God forbid, stuck on an island, and the Lord spoke to you and said, it's Tuesday, right? Even though your count, right, was that it was supposed to be Thursday, I have a feeling, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, that you might start to observe it if it was Thursday and have Shabbos a few days earlier. Because direct contact with divinity is not something that most of us enjoy. And if we do, we don't talk about it publicly, because then they take you off in a padded vehicle, okay? Because most people don't talk that way. People get inspiration maybe, right? Or they have insight, but most people don't talk about the Lord speaking directly to them. Okay, we're going around. Who had a question? I'm gonna come this way. Yes, sir.
Speaking in terms of festivals and time, how is it in Israel that there is only one day for Pesach? And we're used to 2 days here.
Right. You're talking about the first 2
When
days.
was that decided?
So this is what you call, Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyos. This is the second day of Yom Tov. That's for those who are in the diaspora. This is what we call God's divine reward, or the rabbi's divine punishment, for people who don't live in Israel. P.S. We can laugh at it, but it makes a lot of sense. If you want to make Israel and Jerusalem in particular, Tabur Haaretz, the belly button of the universe. Why do I say the belly button of the universe? Because the prophets talk about Israel being the belly button of the universe. What does the belly button do? It provides sustenance to the child within the womb, right? If we want to say that Israel is that for us, then you have to treat the reality of living in Israel with an elevated status or with an easier status. I always say this to people. The consequence of not making aliyah and living outside the land of Israel, the punishment is you have to have 2 days of Yom Tov. You have to eat Pesach, you have to eat one more day of matzah on the 8th day of Pesach. And I say it as a joke, but if you think about it, it's the price that we pay when we all know that we could go to our travel agent right after Shabbos. You don't have to go to travel agent, you go online, right? Give your credit card, and you could be in Israel in what, 15 hours, 16 hours from now, you could be in Israel. If you wanted to, we could all make aliyah if we really wanted to. The truth is that there are a lot of other reasons why we don't make aliyah. Some of them are personal, some of them are internal, some of them are external, some of them have to do with Israel, some of them have to do with us, some of them have to do with our children, some of them have to do with our grandchildren. Lots of things that we could give excuses for. But if the ideal is to live in the land of Israel, you're allowed to say, not yet. Right? That was Franz Rosenzweig who said, do you keep kosher? He said, not yet. Do you keep fully Shabbos? Not yet. It's a great way to talk about things because the aspiration is ultimately to get there. Okay? Do I live in Israel? Not yet. I would love to live in Israel. I'd love to make aliyah, right? You know the old joke about how do you make a small fortune in Israel? Come with a big one. That's the truth because it's very expensive to live in Israel. Okay, yes. Oh, wait. Well, you're right. Yeah, please.
So talking about the calendar, I always have an issue with leap year.
Yeah.
And that's because we can't, if we didn't do that, then Passover would be in the fall or whatever.
Right.
Nowhere in here does it say, that it has to be in the spring.
Right. It does. It actually does. It does from
It doesn't,
almost.
it just says the 14th.
Doesn't say it there maybe, but it does say.
Right. Right. It's called Chag Aviv, and I think it's really important that you're pointing this out. I think that what you're raising is an ecological consciousness that our ancestors had, which we don't necessarily have, which the Torah really wants for us to have. Did you follow that? We don't have it, and the Torah wants us to have it. And I want to give you something to remember. Don't remember anything else that I said, okay? Promise me, you won't remember anything else that I said, but this you should remember. This is what? A triangle facing up. This is not Sesame Street. This is a triangle facing down.
It's an optometrist test.
Take the triangle facing up and put it on top of the triangle facing down, and you have a Magen David.
Yeah.
Which is what? Which is an indication that Judaism is a synthesis of that which exists there and that which exists here. We are in partnership with the divine. Some things we defer above, some things we defer down below. It is only in the synthesis.
Directions.
Pardon me?
You're leaving out the other 4 directions on that.
But they
side.
exist, but they do exist. They do exist. Sometimes they meet and sometimes they don't. And by the way, this is not a perfect metaphor, okay? But this is what Rosenzweig referred to as the star of redemption, right? The star of redemption. Why does it redeem you? Because it says to you, some things are in the hands of God and some things are in your hands. And only in partnership with the divine are you able to create a Judaism that speaks to both the transcendent and to the basic. And isn't that true? If every one of your date nights was a transcendent moment when your soul leaves your body because you're so in love, right? I mean, that would be really wonderful. But let's talk about it honestly, right? Not every time it's like that. So every once in a while, you have special moments where it feels transcendent. But the reality, it doesn't mean you don't go on dates, right? You go on dates because you're hoping for the moment in time when it becomes a transcendent moment and brings you to the place of transcendence and love. Okay, you were finishing up, so,
Can I follow up on?
but it was your question, but we're going this way. Follow up, go in order, let's go in order, yes.
Yeah, so couple things. One is I appreciate the idea that more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Mm.
So just to explore this a little bit further, I actually like what you're saying about
I'm surprised.
Israel being primary, and that's the reason why. But the reason why that's given is that when you don't have a set calendar, if people are further away, they don't know what the right first day is. So you have to observe both as the first day, just in case.
No, I'm with you 100%, but here's my issue. Once we establish a calendar, I get a luach every year. I paid $18.95 this year. The price is going up, right? I get a luach. We've established a luach a long. Right, no, it'll be $26.95.
No, they won't be getting terrified.
Oh, no, there'll be a tariff on it, I promise you. But they'll call it in French, tarif, but very nice.
I'll offer another one that you might not like.
But just 1 second, so I actually think that what you're saying is really consequential. Really is important for us to understand that keeping the second day of Yontif means that we're thinking about both from a perspective of, let's say from the positive perspective, get one more day where I don't have to work. I get one more day where I can have the energy of Pesach. I have one more day where I can get the energy. By the way, you know what they do with the last day in most places? Hasidic groups. They make a special meal on the holiday called Sudat HaMashiach. Anybody hear this comedian Modi? You heard of this comedian Modi? He always talks about Mashiach energy, Mashiach energy. Go online and see Modi, right? Mashiach energy. The last day, the 8th day of Yontif, right? Turn it on, 8 on its side and you get infinity. What is that saying? It's saying that you have an opportunity to do this for one more day and do it in a way that's infinite. By the way, what do Sephardic Jews do? What are Moroccan Jews, for example? The last day of Pesach, at the end of you have Mimuna, right? You have the Maimonides celebration where they eat and they celebrate. And by the way, who made that food for them? Because it's not Pesach. They're Arab neighbors, which means they had to be in relationship with what? Their non-Jewish cohort that lived in their town. What did that do between people? Right? If you have to make food for people and they pay you for it, and without it, you don't have a celebration, you thank people, you create ahava, ve'achva, shalom, ve'reut, you create peace and relationships amongst people, right? It's like the kind of relationship that you have with your baker or your caterer or your person who does whatever work for you. We have this wonderful relationship with the ladies who clean our house. And as we were going through items, we were going to put them out to give away. And one of the ladies came to me and said, listen, this is really beautiful. I know you usually give away to tzedakah. You give it to the various places that you like to give. I really have somebody who could use this. Would you? And I said, how wonderful, right? And we gave it to her and she gave it to somebody. And the person sent us a lovely note saying, we've never had such nice things. Thank you so much. The Jewish people are generous people. What a kiddush Hashem, what a sanctification of God's name, right? And I never would have thought to give it to my cleaning people, but they wanted to do a mitzvah with it. And by the way, they didn't keep it for themselves. That would be a mitzvah too, to give it to them if they needed it or wanted it. But what about to the people, to a third party that she thought enough in her head to say, I want to give it to somebody who's poor and needy. Wow, what a wonderful opportunity. Okay, you had one more thing you wanted to say.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that it relates to what you said at first about this whole idea of you declare your part of this. Because sometimes when you're in synagogue leadership, you have this kind of discussion, but somebody says, so we still have these extra days of Yontif. What's that about sociologically, so to speak, or at base? Maybe what it's about is people want it.
Yeah.
If we had this discussion some years ago, what if, just hypothetically, what if we did eliminate it for whatever reason? Maybe it saves some money or whatever in the budget. I'm making that up, but And the answer was, you'd have an outcry. People would say, what happens to the Torah reading for that day? What happens to the Haftarah for that day? We have to have it.
Right.
And if they don't have it in Israel, well, okay, so they're missing out on that. That's the other irony of it, and it relates also to what you said, because we used to be an agrarian society. I mean, this whole Torah is about
Right.
how to manage an agrarian society.
Right, right.
And we were forced out of that in Galut.
Yeah.
And we've gotten back to it somewhat in Israel, but an awful lot of people aren't really involved in that. So that's another irony.
You know, it's interesting to me, by the way, I think you made some really, really consequential points. Just one thing I want to add is that Israeli society has not necessarily returned to what we will call the spiritual, religious, agrarian reality, but they've definitely returned to a spiritual agrarian. Israelis are very connected to the earth. They do more hiking than most people do. The holidays of Pesach and Shavuot, and particularly Sukkot, when it's started the rainy season but not yet rainy, people go on big tiyulim, big, and they really get into it, right? And it might make us a little sad that they're not doing the religious aspects of it, but they're definitely being earthbound and really connected to
We also get
it.
an echo of it, and certainly when I was a kid, and I think when my son was a kid, of when you do something, when you give something to JNF that's gonna plant trees, that's about the partnership you're talking about, because God provides the rain and the proper soil and whatever it may be.
Right.
And we plant the tree and try to take care of it. And then
No argument for me that these are
somebody
religious
comes
experiences.
along who might be a terrorist and burns it down, and we plant it again.
Right. Or we plant the wrong kind of trees, like talk about the drying out of the swamps with the eucalyptus trees, which destroyed Israeli soil for many years. Okay, more comments, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Saying about, the agriculture and the ending of the month, the leap year. We were very good about that. We kept to, a seasonal or agricultural, year. According to the Bible. Yet we don't, so we have adapted on that score.
Right.
But we have not adapted to, I think one of the main things that we have against Birkat Kohanim is they may or may not really be a Kohen. There are so many problems.
Meaning in terms of their attitude, their behavior, their
It's not.
morals.
They're descendants.
And the fact that we really don't know, some of them are intermarried, some of them, whatever.
Yeah.
The point is,
Not to
a lot
mention-
of us think of it as not equal, like with women not.
The egalitarian issue. Reconstructionist Judaism and right, but by the way, I don't know if you know, but in town here, I mean, it hasn't met for a long time, but there's a partnership minyan, right? Where men and women are equal and they share responsibility for the davening from their side of the mechitza. So women will do from one side, men from the other. They open the curtain during the reading of the Torah. It was at Fairmont when until Fairmont was no more, but that's had this kind of, and it was an attempt, and it was interesting to see who came. There were Orthodox people and there were conservative people. And there were people who were sort of in between and wanted to experience this kind of interesting reality, which I thought was sort of fascinating because they were trying to literally cut the baby in half, right? They were trying to find a way to speak to one group and speak to another group, or maybe bring groups of Jews together who don't normally talk to one another, or definitely don't daven together, right? Together in a certain kind of way, which brought a certain kind of relationship between certain individuals who otherwise would not have those relationships. I think it was probably for LGBTQ plus, right, that you had people who were gay and lesbian, right, and all kinds of it created a confusion for people because can an LGBTQ person be a Kohen or a Levi?
Why not?
Okay, the question is, do they identify as male or do they identify as female? Like the question is, what are they? And do we believe that women can be Kohanim and can women be Leviim? And like those are all questions. In the conservative synagogue, when we used to duchen, in the conservative synagogue, who went up? Only men, not women. So then we started to include them, and they declared themselves. We're Carnie, whether you knew it or not. So I think that the point is that at some point, there's a slippery slope of inclusion. I would just say, generally speaking, my orientation is if a person tells you they're Cohen, they're a Cohen. Person tells you they're a Levi, they're a Levi, right? Like, what are they gonna get? Shlishi or Shani or Rishon? Like, what's gonna be, what are they gaining by declaring this?
A
Right?
lot of aliyot. So
A lot of aliyot, okay.
Few of them
Then they're gonna,
like
it's
that.
good, it's good. Okay, can I go on? Can I go on? One more question, one more question? Okay, yes.
How do you reconcile the concept of a partnership with God? For people who believe God can predict everything, God runs the world,
I
and
believe-
how does this free will?
Let me square the circle for you, okay? This Torah is God's Torah. God wanted this to be in the book, right? And so these words that are here are been sanctioned by a higher authority. In other words, Moses didn't do this alone. Moses did this in partnership with God. V'zot HaTorah, right? This is a Torah. Asher Sam Moshe, right? Lifnei b'nei Israel, before the people of Israel. Al pi Adonai, the word of God, biyad Moshe, right? It doesn't come to us without a combination of God and humanity, represented by Moses in this reality. All of our religious existence is God-based, but mitigated by teachers and preachers and holy people or elevated people who have the great task of making this available to us. And when I say available, think about this. What do you know about Torah? What do you know about Torah? You know what you read in books and mostly what you heard in teachings and sermons and or read online, right? A lot of stuff, right? And you could say all of that comes from God, which is true, but mitigated through the funnel of humanity. Great teachers. Think about the most important lessons which you hold on to. They usually come from parents or grandparents or somebody who was a majorly significant teacher in your life. Think about the things that you do and the things that you don't do, the things that you avoid. And why do you do the things that you do and why do you do the things that you avoid? Or don't do the things that you avoid. And it has to do with who taught those things to you. And very often, by the way, when you get into a partnership, let's say marriage as an example, right? How much are you influenced by the person who comes into the marriage, right? How much is your household dictated by you exclusively or modified? You're about to get remarried. Your life is going to change and it's going to be modified by virtue of the fact that you have a new person in the house. And you know what? At a certain point, you've probably gotten used to the way things are in your reality. And some things are going to change. Right?
That's the same during your dating and engagement. Sometimes.
He's talking very personally right now.
No. I think that's overall, because I think when you get to that point, you're starting to meld ideas and her ideas are good and yours ideas.
So
are
let
bad.
me say the following. What
When-
Simchas Torah is, right, and all of the reality is what? What do we do on Simchas Torah? You circle how many times? At a wedding, how many times do you circle? 7. What's this all about? You're marrying God, right? That's the concept. You and God are becoming united as one. And so it changes you in the relationship. And some of it means
I
you're
always thought that 7.
just a random number.
No, it's just a magical number.
So it is a magical
It's a
number.
magical number.
But
Everything is 7.
Point is, it's a magical number of completion, right? And that's why 8 is so important, because it's above the natural order of things. When I say to you, somebody, I love you infinity, right? Which is what our kids always say to us because they can't find the words to express it. I love you infinity is a beautiful concept because they don't know what's beyond completion. Infinity is beyond completion. That's where God is in infinity. Okay, can I go on?
The 7-day week comes from the Torah.
Of course.
Of course, entire civilization.
And the notion of Shabbat comes from.
I mean, it's not a natural time frame.
Correct.
But the whole world uses the 7-day week. Is there any?
Aren't we great? Aren't we great? I want to be Jewish. Okay, can we go to page 729 for a moment, just to put the emphasis on the syllable here? Verse 37. Ele moadei Adonai asher tikreu otam mikrae kodesh. What does it say here? I went to verse 37. Those are the set times of the Lord that you shall celebrate of sacred occasion, bringing gifts to the Lord, burnt offering. But it says, Ele moadei Adonai asher tikreu otam, which you will declare them to be. That's the point. It emphasizes it over and over and over again, and you have to not be listening or not being sensitive if you don't see what's going on here. You have to be involved. The declaration of the day makes it reality, right? By the way, are you married if you simply live together? We call it common law marriage, right? Lawyers in the room. It's common law marriage, and it has legal efficacy in a certain way. But the Torah is saying something different. The Torah is saying what? You need to make a declaration. By the way, where else do we have to make declarations? Ve'anita ve'amarta, agami oved avi vayered mitzrayma, right? This is all about what? Passover. And then when,
First fruits.
yes, it's also bikurim. You have to make all these declarations about what? About this is who I am and this is what I believe in. You know, it used to be when I did bar mitzvah speeches with kids, right? I said the bar mitzvah speech is I declare speech. I declare the following, right? I don't want to just teach you theoretical nice ideas that you learned from Rashi or from Rambam, right? Those are nice things. I want you to know those things. But what I want you to talk about is what am I going to do now that I am a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah? How am I going to be different? What is my commitment on this day? That's why we got into the whole tzedakah project thing, right? Which we never link, by the way. Did you ever notice this kid's speech? We have the concept that they're trying to teach us and boom. And then for my mitzvah project, what's the connection between the two? Right? It's a non sequitur that we need to put a little paragraph saying, and because I feel this way about my religious tradition, I'm therefore going to put flesh on the bones of my existence as a Jew by doing the following mitzvot. It's one little paragraph that needs to be added to every bar mitzvah speech, or by the way, to almost any speech that anybody gives, right? I'm donating $3 million for the next renovation of this synagogue. But why? Why? If you don't say why, I mean, we'll still take the money, I'm sure. But the why is so very important. You know, in business, right, there are business people around this table, right? It's all about we know in this town, it's all about the who. I got it because he wrote the book, okay? It's all about the who, but it's also really about the why. Why we're doing what it is that we're doing. Don't your kids ask you that all the time, your grandkids? Why? Why, Bubby? Why, Zadie? Why are we doing it this way? And if you can't answer the why, then there's a problem, I think. Listen, something you need to add? Okay, yeah, no problem. I didn't know if there was something.
The question is, who's the who that you were saying?
Oh, who is the who?
Yeah.
Listen, generally speaking, when Mort Mandela talked about the who, he talked about A players, right? He talked about he has got his little book that he wrote. It's a beautiful little book, right? It's really about the people. And he really believed that there are A, B, and C players, right? There are people who are A plus folks, and we know that to be the case. It's a little bit hierarchical for me, because I got to tell you, there are a lot of B players, right? In terms of, I don't know, intellect, ability, who make huge differences, who make A changes in the world, right? Do you ever have a person who is basically an average pedagogue? You ever had somebody like that? But they influence you because they had you read a pedagogue, a teacher, right? So I had a teacher and he was not a great pedagogue, but you know what he introduced me to? Literature. He told me where to find the sources that ultimately inspired me, right? Do you ever have people like that in your life who suggested a book to you that changed your life? Not because they're brilliant and not because they're the best people in the world, but because they were generous of spirit enough to share what it is that they know and what they feel, right? This book was important to me, read it. And you know, when anybody gives me a book, I read it. I really do. I'm not even, I don't even like it, right? But I'll read it because somebody took the time to think that this might be important. So I read it. Now, I'm a reader, so it's not such a big deal for me to read one more book. But the truth of the matter is, we think about the people who made a difference for us. So what Mort was trying to talk about were hiring the best people, And the truth is, you can find people who can go from being B to being A in your lifetime by virtue of what role they play in your life and what do they catalyze and facilitate for you, even if they're not the greatest of geniuses. And I think that's very.
That's the criteria.
100%, right? What's the criteria?
And there's a history in this town of making those criteria too stiff.
Yeah.
Which has not helped the area.
Right. I think you're probably right, and I think you could probably make an argument for that. Okay, can I do one more thing before I let you go? Oh my God, what time is it? My God, Rabbi goes on and on and on and on. Okay, I want you to go to the very end of the parasha, which is really what I really wanted to do. Okay, page 732, verse 17. Okay? Okay, somebody want to read for us in English? Oh, you don't even have a book. You want to get one? You want to get one? Want a chumash? Okay. Okay, somebody read out loud. It's your favorite language, English. Go ahead, Rick, please.
The loss is stated here because.
Oh, no, verse 17.
17.
If anyone kills.
Anyone kills any.
I'm on the wrong page, sorry.
Okay.
I am on 732.
Yeah, in the verses, if
not
anyone.
verse.
He goes to the commentary first, cheater.
Here,
If anyone,
17.
Oh, if anyone kills any human being, he shall be put to death. One who kills a beast shall make restitution.
okay, let's stop for a moment. Okay, what's this called? What's this law called? Eye for an eye. This is called lex talionis, if you're looking for, the Latin for this, lex talionis, okay?
By the way,
This-
you're right, I do go to the commentary first always.
That's good. That's good. It's a little cheating, but okay. No, so it's an eye for an eye, and we all know this, right? An eye for an eye. And I just want to just make sure to watch this, okay? It kind of gives this throughout line, right? Read it one more time. And a person who does what? Anyone kills any human being, he shall be put to death, right? So if you kill somebody, what's going to happen to you? You're going to get killed, okay? Now, we already know that what?
That's what I was gonna.
That doesn't only happen. In fact, Judaism says what? Do we put people to death who kill people?
Oh.
Generally speaking, no. There's between killing and murdering, right? And by the way, any Beit Din that determined once in 70 years that a person should be put to death was called a what?
Wrong words.
It's not wrong words, but the right concept, right? It was called a brutal court and therefore was immediately disbanded, which tells you that what? It didn't exist. It was a theoretical law that was put in place as a deterrent to scare the living daylights out of people. But the truth of the matter is, how often did they really put people to death? Not very often. You see it in the Torah, but you don't see it throughout Jewish history playing itself out over the course of time. Because why? Because in the final analysis, the notion of you kill somebody, we put you to death, and keep on reading, go on, and you do what? And if you, one who kills a beast, right?
Shall make restitution.
Well, that makes sense, right? A human is one level, but a beast, you don't put a person to death for killing a beast, you make them restitution, but keep on going.
If anyone maims his fellow as he has done so, it shall be done to him.
Wait a second, does that make any sense? You knock out somebody's eye, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna poke out your eye? What kind of reality is this? Go on, fracture for fracture.
Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, the injury he inflicted on another shall be inflicted on him.
Right, so stop right there. Does that make sense to you? Is this a religious tradition that you're gonna buy into? And the answer, of course, is that the rabbis immediately say what? This is not going to be a matter of I'm knocking out people's eyes or knocking out their teeth or cutting off their arms. It's going to be restitution. What we're going to do is we're going to pay for the value of that eye, that value of that hand, that value of that foot, that value of their hearing, whatever, the sight, whatever it is. So what does that mean to you? First of all, it says that what's written in the Torah, despite the fact, as my teachers will say, is geschrieben, it's written. Just because it's written does not mean that we are going to do what? We're going to actuate it into our civilization because it would create a civilization that would not be civilized. Because what would end up happening, as the Talmud said, is we'll walk around with a whole bunch, as Fiddler on the Roof says, we'll walk around and have, everybody will be blind and without teeth, right? We're gonna be walking around knocking out people's eyes and knocking out people's teeth as a way of restitution. That's restitution. So what do the rabbis ultimately say? It is, what is restitution? It is a financial restitution. But what's the problem with financial restitution? I'm a butcher, and so my eye could be worth this. I'm a jeweler, I'm a lapidary, my eye is worth a whole lot more. The whole reality of the way in which the religious civilization evolves is it takes a kernel of a concept, which we have in the Torah, and says the following: this will not suffice. And I cannot believe that there's a God in heaven who would want us to live this way. By the way, do you see the audacity and the chutzpah of the rabbis who come after the Torah? Would you deign to do this? Would you dare to do this? Would you have this much audacity to say, wait a second here. It says this, but it's that? I don't know. Is that not a certain kind of level of holy chutzpah? But because it's written here. It's written here. What do you do?
That's why you have an oral tradition.
Okay, great. So now you brought us to an understanding of
Everything is.
why the tradition is the way it is. It is an opportunity for mitigation through an alternative source, which is called the oral Torah. And the rabbis go so far as to create the mythology that what? When Moses was giving the Torah to the children of Israel on Mount Sinai, declaring all of these things, in addition to that, he gave them, well, to call it shorthand, he gave them Rashi. He also gave them the commentary, right? The old joke that I learned when I was a yeshiva student, right? Rabbi Steinsaltz, Dean Steinsaltz of blessed memory, taught me this. He said, why is a human being created with two hands? One to follow the text and one to follow the commentary. Right? To follow the commentary, to follow along both simultaneously, and we'll go back to our triangles, one facing up and one facing down. If the one facing up is the written word, then the one facing down, which mitigates it, is what? Is the oral tradition, which modifies. By the way, in the final analysis, answer the question for me, riddle me this. Which do we really follow? If we follow the rabbinic tradition, what are we really following?
Oral.
Right, the oral tradition supersedes the written tradition, except among certain groups of Karaites and things of that sort. But that's why we're not those people, right? Even in our own tradition, who were the ones who were punctiliously observing the word of Torah as we have it? Right, the Sadducees and not the Pharisees. And we are, of course, rabbinic Jews, the followers of the Pharisees. And when they call us Pharisaic or they call us Pharisees in the New Testament, right, it's no compliment. Because what they're saying is, you're the people who pachke, right, who play around with religious civilization and religious tradition and make what you want out of the tradition rather than follow the word of God. You know why it was easy for people who were Sadducitic to do that? Because they were rich, because they had slaves working for them. When it was hard for you to live a certain kind of way because you were a poor person living down the hill, right? Here's the temple, and you know who lived down here? The average peon, right? And by the way, what came down here? Talk about peon. What came down the slope of the mountain? Right, all of the dung, right? That's why there's Dung Gate, right? In the city of Jerusalem, right? All of that ends up here. People living up here in the heights, we're near the heights, right? People live in the heights, live a certain kind of lifestyle. People who live in the valley don't necessarily enjoy the same kind of reality. And so Jewish tradition, again, had to balance between these two. And ultimately, the rabbinic tradition was not made up of, generally speaking, wealthy individuals. If they were wealthy of knowledge. They were wealthy of creativity. They were wealthy in all kinds of wonderful creative ways, but they were not wealthy in terms of material. Who was that? That was the Kohanim. And in the Talmud, all kinds of conversations about Kohanim who would take their tefillin and gild them. Gild them, okay? Which meant that what? They looked beautiful and they were worth a lot, but who couldn't have those kind of tefillin? The average person living down the hill, not living in the city, the shining city on the hill, which was Jerusalem. They were, pardon me?
That's what's happening. Bigger the better.
Okay, so bigger. By the way, there are people who wear on their tefillin gold chains. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Ever seen a Sephardic person at Sukkot with their lulav? They take gold chains and wrap them around their lulav, right? And there's a big argument as to whether or not this is permissible. Because what ends up happening, instead of the beautification of the mitzvah, it becomes a competition between people about who can have the most beautiful etrog, the most beautiful lulav, the most expensive this to fill in, the most expensive everything, right? And then you start to get into conspicuous consumption. And if you think it doesn't exist, but only except amongst individuals, you're wrong. How about synagogues? Now, by the way, this is a beautiful synagogue, but can you create a reality where you've gilded the lily? Sure you can. Is it important to say we want to make our synagogue beautiful, but not ungepatched?
Yeah.
You know what ungepatched means? It means ungepatched. It's just too much, just too much. And the point is, can you have enough self-control to limit what it is that we do. I'm not saying you shouldn't have all the things that you need. The question is, at what level do you need it? And this is, by the way, one of the most important, I think, and I'm going to end here, most important Jewish lessons. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to, right? And we have systems that are put into place to mitigate that. You know that a rich person has a whole series of different legal requirements in terms of tzedakah. We all know 10% is the rule. By the way, their 10% and my 10% are two different numbers, okay? But in and of itself, a very wealthy person is not permitted to stop at 10%. You know, the average person is not allowed to give more than 20%, except if you are profoundly wealthy. Then there is no limitation on the amount that you can give. We don't talk about that usually. We talk about the 10% because we'd be happy if everybody just gave 10%. But the reality is we need to talk about the fact that we are living in a time and a place where we have the wherewithal to make a huge difference in the world. And the Jewish community itself has made a huge difference in the world, right? If you think about the kind of money the Jewish community has been able to raise and the kind of difference it's able to make. And again, I'm just going to compliment living in Cleveland, $180 million raised for day school education, whether you agree or don't agree about that, right? Just the ability to do that is a real statement of what we have here in town. And it's not true in every town. Let me tell you, it's not true in every town. I just, coming from the shul that I'm going to, just did a $12 million renovation. You know why they hired me? Because they didn't raise 12 million, they raised 9. So my job is going to be to raise 3 more, and it's Canadian dollars. It's only like, you know.
So it's only a million.
One of the things that I'm going to have to do, really at first when I get there, is address the notion of a deficit of $3 million, right? And I have to be able to do that as a rabbi. And that's part of my responsibility and obligation, to be able to do that for the sake of the community. So the question, if you want to take it further back, did they gild the lily? Did they overspend? Should they have done it in a different kind of way? And that's a real question that I can't answer because I wasn't there. Right? Remember, it was also during COVID and a whole host of other things came into play and made it difficult for people. Okay, but the reality is, in the Jewish community, we have to learn how to hold them and how to fold them, when to hold them and when to fold them. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. And just because we committed to something, right, doesn't mean, or because we have committed to something, doesn't mean we're absolved of our responsibility. If we committed, let's get it done, right? You can't leave projects halfway done. That's not a good thing either, right? If you opened up the ceiling and you didn't replace the tile, it wouldn't be nice. It's a parsonage. It's the wrong thing to do, even if you have to raise a little bit more. But the truth of the matter is that we sometimes have to kind of recalibrate. And I think one of the points of all of this section of the Torah, right? In the holiness code of our Torah. Remember, there are 5 books of the Torah. Let's go them out loud. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. What book are we in? Leviticus. Leviticus is the middle book of the Torah, what we call Lev HaTorah, the heart of the Torah. And we're right in the heart of the Torah, right? With this holiness code is in the heart of the Torah. It's right in the middle. These rules may appear to us to be somewhat arbitrary, but in the end, they're the heart of the matter. And one of the hearts of the matter is, how do we address these realities of lex talionis, an eye for an eye? How do we address these issues? And the only way to address them is not to remain slavishly committed to the written word, but to apply what has always been the greatness of our tradition, which is the oral tradition, the rabbinic, and let's expand it beyond the rabbinic, the communal orientation to how to apply Torah to our lives in a way that's menschlich, right? In a way that's sensitive, in a way that's nuanced, and a way that is seichelic, that makes sense for next generation. If we do that, then our children will come to the Torah like thirsty people for water. When we don't do that, we chase people away from the tradition. And I think one of the big issues we raised here today is the extra day of Yom Tov. Is it a boon or is it a bane? And I think those are one of the things that we really have to think about as we move the process forward. I will predict to you that over the course of the next 10 years, in addition to the issues of intermarriage, the next thing is going to be whether there'll be a second day of Yom Tov or not in most conservative centers. Because it's not only an issue of cost for people in terms of what it costs to close the shul or to man the shul or woman the shul, right? Have enough people in the shul. It's also the cost of doing business and the cost of not doing business. right? And those are all kinds of things that people are starting to talk about. Maybe not in Cleveland. In Cleveland, you're Kodesh, the holy city, but in other places in the country, these issues are coming up because there are lots of communities that are struggling. Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
Elaine asked you something. One question.
Thinking about intermarriage and all that, but if they, let's say, become inspired and go to Israel, they're not gonna be accepted.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. And my question is that also something that we need to fight for? In other words, I think that we have to fight for conservative and Reform Judaism in Israel, even though Reform Judaism is not my choice of Judaism, but I think we have to fight for options in Israel because it means that another group of people might get engaged with the future of the Jewish state. And I worry about that because, look, it's hard for me to say, but there's so much distancing right now from Israel. We don't see it here. We're in many ways immune to it, but go to other communities. I was just in a community visiting for Shabbat, and there was an anti-Israel rally that had more people come to the anti-Israel rally, Jews, than came to the pro-Israel rally.
They should be, there's shame on them.
Yeah, I mean, I was disappointed. I was more than disappointed. I was really sad.
Yes.
Like my heart was breaking for them. And but here's the issue. They are, we call it in Hebrew, tinokot shenishbeu levena goyim. It means they are children who've been raised amongst the non-Jews. They've been influenced by a world that they don't understand. And by the way, they're mostly tend to be younger people who were born after 1948, right? Who don't understand the difference between what exists today and existed then. My dad, was born in 1939. He still remembers all the people coming over with the numbers back to Brooklyn. And he also remembers 1948, 1947, 1948, the celebrations in the street of Brooklyn, right? He remembers what that meant to the people of Israel and that people who were recovering, coming from the gas chambers, suddenly were dancing and singing in the streets and had a life and a future and felt optimism that they hadn't felt in many, many, many years. But that's not our kids. Our kids barely remember 1973 because they're born a lot later than that, right? They were born in the 80s, let's say. And what do they remember? They remember Lebanon, the quagmire of Lebanon. It's like if you were born in the middle of the Vietnam conflict, what did you think about, right? It's not a strange thing that people who were born in the 60s are a certain kind of orientation to the world. Not everybody, but there's an orientation. And we are living at a time when we have to be very judicious about increasing love of Israel and making sure that everybody gets there. My daughter is going to Australia next year, my youngest. I said to her, Australia? You're taking a gap year? She said, Abba, I did a gap year in high school. I want to go back, but the university will not grant me my courses. I will lose an entire semester of my courses. And I'm not talking about schools that are not in Cleveland. She goes to school here. She goes to Case Western. They told her she cannot be guaranteed that she'll get her courses if she goes to Israel. Can you imagine that?
That's not for any place, it's just for Israel.
It's for Israel. No, there are a few other places. There are what they call level 3 countries. Israel is a level 3 country, right? And they're scared about sending their kids there because I understand the university, right? Oh, 3, God forbid, children from Cleveland or from, I don't know, Cleveland State or from Case Western, right? Went to Israel and something happened to them, right? What does it do for the whole system? I understand it, right? But that means that a whole generation of kids are not going like many of us did for our junior year abroad. Who's going to populate the Hebrew University? And where's the money coming from for the Hebrew University? And that means the Hebrew University suffers as much as Israel wants to say, we don't need the diaspora. It's not true. That income is very consequential and significant. Very consequential and significant. I'll give you just one example. My daughter's in medical school, and they told the medical students that there's going to be no more English language programs in Israel. And all the seats in medical school are going to go to Israelis because they need to create Israeli doctors. Nobody thought about what? The marginal cost of running the university without the income from American and Canadian students. So now they're having a whole conversation about whether it can exist or not.
Well, we have the same thing here. Don't get to be foreigners.
I got it. Listen, realpolitik I understand. What I'm worried about is what does it do for kids in the Shema if they don't go to Israel for a gap year? That's what and you miss out on that kind of Zionism. Last question.